Members at 10 o'clock, bring the meeting to order, and just a reminder that the meeting will be recorded and available to view on the Council's website. Could I ask IT colleagues to start recording? Now pass you over to Christine for the sediment.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. Councillor Douglas Reid.
Yeah.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Christine, thanks.
Councillor John McFadden. Nope. Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Here.
Councillor Maureen Mackay. Nope. Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Yep, here, thanks.
Councillor Barry Douglas.
Here, thanks.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Here, thanks.
Councillor Claire Maitland.
Here.
Councillor Drew Filson.
Here.
And Dr David Lewis.
Here.
Claire McKellar.
Here.
Babs Mowat. Babs, can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. Jackie Livingston.
Yes, I'm here.
And I have an apology from Norman Watt. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Christine. Now come to the bit, just if there's any declaration of interest, to give you the opportunity to come in just now. I don't think there's anything obvious, but okay, we'll carry on to the next item, which is the first of our items, and it's revisions to the early learning and childcare allocation policy. And I'll pass you over to Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This report seeks approval from Cabinet to a revision of the early learning and childcare allocation policy in terms of the statutory starting dates for eligibility of funded early learning and childcare for 3-year-olds, and refinements to the narrative and priority criteria 2, 3, 6 and 7 for the allocation of funded places and patterns of hours in early childhood centres, funded providers, including childminders, and cross-boundary places for eligible 2-year-olds and entitled 3 and 4-year-olds. Recommendations 1 or 2 are set out in paragraph 2 and seek approval from Cabinet for these revisions. Paragraphs 3 and 4 provide the background to the duty on local authorities to provide up to 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare for all eligible children, which now includes children whose birth date is on or between the school commencement date in August to the end of February and whose parents choose to delay their start date to primary 1. Paragraphs 5 through to 10 advise of the statutory starting dates for funded early learning and childcare for eligible 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, which begin in the term after the child's 2nd or 3rd birthday, and that in East Ayrshire we have used the discretionary powers under the 1980 Act to provide funded early learning and childcare to 3-year-olds earlier than the statutory starting dates, that is from the month after the child's 3rd birthday. Since the introduction of funded early learning and childcare for eligible 2-year-olds, we have adhered to the starting dates for this age group, which is the term after a child's 2nd birthday. Paragraph 8 notes the outcome of a recent survey via the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland Early Years Network to all 32 local authorities in Scotland about the application of starting dates of funded early learning and childcare for 3-year-olds. A total of 28 local authorities responded, with 16 noted that they have always applied the statutory starting dates as per the term after the child's 3rd birthday. 5 noting they have applied the discretionary power, and 3-year-olds starting in the month after their 3rd birthday, including ourselves, and 7 noting that 3-year-olds take up their place when they turn 3 years of age. The survey also noted that 4 local authorities were considering the implementation of the statutory starting dates from academic year 24-25. Taking account of the statutory starting dates for funded early learning and childcare for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds as set out in Table 1, and the extension of the entitlement to 4-year-olds with birth dates as described in paragraph 4, the proposal is to apply the statutory starting dates for funded hours of early learning and childcare from the term after the child's 3rd birthday for applications for places in academic year 24-25. This proposal will provide equity regarding access for eligible 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds in terms of statutory starting dates, and will also provide cost savings with meals, payments to funded providers and cross-boundary payments. The starting dates under the legislation are set out in Table 1. Turning to the priority criteria in paragraph 11, experience of allocating places for academic year 23-24 has identified a need to review and further refine the narrative to provide further clarity for parents in terms of priority criteria 2, 3, 6 and 7 of the Early Learning and Childcare Allocations Policy. The proposed revisions are set out in the report and also in Appendix 1. Paragraphs 14 to 46 describe the implications on policy, governance, human resources, equality and fair Scotland duty, financial risk and community wealth building. There are 2 points under human resources I would like to draw to your attention. The first being the proposal to implement the statutory starting dates for 3-year-olds to the term of the 3rd birthday may have implications for the early learning and childcare workforce, as the number of staff required to meet the minimum adult-child ratio will be dependent on the uptake of places of eligible 3-year-olds each term according to their birth date. The other point is that from April of this year, the provisions in the new Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act 2019 will come into force. The Act places a statutory duty on care service providers to ensure that at all times suitable, qualified and competent individuals are working in such numbers as are appropriate for health, well-being and safety of people using the service and the provision of safe and high-quality care, the well-being of staff, and providers are also required to ensure staff are appropriately trained for the work that they perform. That concludes the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Members, any points? Okay, I see one hand up. I'm not sure who it is.
Morning.
Morning, Councillor Mackay. Morning, morning, over to you.
Morning. Thank you very much. Janie, thank you for that, and thank you for directing us towards the human resources. I think all of us will be aware that in recent times we have had what feels like a growing number of briefings sent to us to tell us that there are restrictions on various early years centres because of staffing issues. Does this have the potential to make this more, or does this have the potential to ease? So although you gave us some indication that there were human resource impacts and you appropriately directed us to the paragraphs, you actually made really no comment to us on, is this going to increase or is this going to decrease the staffing that we actually have? Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Just to let you know, Maureen, before I bring in Jenny, we've got audio contact, but I've got I don't know if it's a background thing, but we don't see it, Maureen, just in case you didn't realise. Okay. Thanks. Okay, Jenny.
Leader, through you, if it's okay, Councillor Mackay, I'll take this question on Janie's behalf. Ultimately, Councillor Mackay, I absolutely recognise the ongoing issue we're having at a couple of centres in respect of staffing. To answer the question is actually quite complex, but to give you a fairly high-level answer. Sorry, to give a fairly high-level answer, Councillor Mackay, we would hope that this would ease the situation because it will stratify some of the start dates in a much better way in terms of all of that. In terms of the current issues with staffing, Councillor Mackay, we've got some fairly unique sets of circumstances ongoing with some centres suffering from multiple staff illnesses, but also a significant amount of maternity leave ongoing in the system at the moment that's having an impact on 2 centres in particular. So we absolutely recognise, number one, that these briefings are going out in that particular space and causing some angst amongst parents out there. And we're doing our very best to try and mitigate that vis-a-vis a reduced service or indeed offering emergency service for those parents who really can't find anything else. But we would be hopeful, Councillor Mackay, that the conditions set out in this paper would actually seek to ease some of the demands on staffing out in the centres in general terms.
Thanks, Linda. You want back in, Maureen?
Yes, please. I suppose just to ask for thank you, Linda. That was very helpful. But just to ask for some further clarification. again, Linda, uptake within our centres and the extent to which our centres are at their maximum capacity, and how this paper will have the potential to have an impact on that. Perhaps you could further expand that. That would be helpful too. Thank you.
Through you, Leader, I'll bring Janie in on that one if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mackay, in terms of when children will be eligible to start in the new academic year, the majority of children will take up their place in August, because those will be the children whose birth dates are between March and the end of August. So that will be the biggest uptake. So we will have to look at our planning in terms of our workforce and deployment of workforce for that particular period of time. In terms of birth dates thereafter, the next intake would be, as you see from the table, would be in January, and thereafter in March or April, depending on when the summer term starts. Again, it may well be that we need to move staff around. It may well be that the number of places in terms of the population will be reduced this year, or we may have a spike. We have seen spikes in population over the years. Our highest population in terms of uptake was in 2017-18, I think, when we had over 3,000 children that were eligible. We're now down at about 2,500, maybe even under 2,500, 2,300 children. So there is a drop in the population in terms of 3 and 4-year-olds, although we are seeing an increase in uptake of places for 2-year-olds. And in Scotland, we are sitting at one of the highest uptakes in terms of 2-year-old population. So there's something that potentially we may need to do in relation to our own establishments in terms of variations to registration to accommodate those 2-year-old places. But again, looking at the cohort of staff that we have, deploying them appropriately at the times we need them in the establishments when we need them. I trust that helps answer the question at this point.
Thanks, Jenny. Maureen, I think there's a delay there. Oh, you're mute, Maureen, if you can. That's you.
Okay, thank you. So again, Janie, we are used to hearing that we have a planning capacity within schools and we have an actual capacity within schools. Do we have parallel figures to that for our early years establishments?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Mackay, we have a registered capacity for every single early learning and childcare centre, and also our funded providers and childminders also have that registered capacity as well. We may not fill all the places as per the registered capacity, but we would staff the establishments according to the number of children that were attending the establishment. That's what we would be required to do in order to meet the minimum child-adult ratios.
Okay, thank you. Could we have an update, please, across the authority of those figures, sort of registration and what the percentage of uptake is across those services? That would be helpful for us. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chair, we'll be able to provide that quite easily.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you very much. That would be good. Thank you.
We'll circulate that to all cabinet members, certainly. If any other members are wanting a copy, they can furnish them with it. Okay, any other comments, questions on that? Graham?
Thanks. It's just a quick question on the increase in delayed starters. So it's been a wee while since I kind of registered my kids for this. It's just, if I'm more interested, it's like, at what kind of notification period would you get notification for the parents that they'd be intending to delay their start to primary one?
Sorry, through you, Chair, just clarification, is this notification in terms of
a further year
they're going to delay their entry to primary one? We advertise the application process for places for academic year at the end of February and also into March. So parents who are thinking about deferring their child's entry to primary one and having that additional year of funded early learning and childcare would let us know at that time. So they're required to let us know by the end of February if they're going to seek that additional funded year and delay their start to primary one. So we get that information in at that time, and parents also would advise their local primary school that they are seeking that additional year of funded early learning and childcare.
Thanks. So you've got a bit of time to plan for. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, anyone else? Okay, can we go to the recommendations, please? Can we, in paragraph 2, page 3, can we agree recommendations? Okay, go to the. Thank you. Go to the next item, which is item 3E, which is payment of sustainable rates to funded providers and childminders. Back to you, Janie.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval from Cabinet to continue the payment of the current hourly rate and meal rate agreed at Cabinet on the 21st of September last year to funded providers and childminders delivering the funded early learning and childcare entitlement for academic year 23-24. There are 5 recommendations set out in paragraph 2 that seek approval from Cabinet, including the recommendation to continue to pay the current hourly rate and rate per meal for the current academic year 23-24. Paragraphs 3 through 6 describe the key tenets of the funded early learning and childcare, including the statutory duty placed on local authorities to provide funded early learning and childcare for all eligible children, funding follows a child approach, and the national standard. Paragraph 7 highlights a key plank of funding follows the child approach, which is the payment of a sustainable rate to funded providers, including childminders. Individual local authorities are responsible for developing their own approach to setting payment rates for funded providers in the statutory provision of early learning and childcare. East Ayrshire's flexible framework for funded early learning and childcare sets out the commitment to an annual review of the sustainable rate rather than an inflationary uplift. Paragraph 8 notes the recent Scottish Government publication in December of last year, Early Learning and Childcare Review of Sustainable Rates, which has examined the approach to setting sustainable rates for funded providers in the private, third and childminding sectors during 2022-23, and paragraphs 9 to 11 summarise the approach used and the outcome that further work should be undertaken to ensure that providers are effectively supported by sustainable rates. The review also confirms that Scottish Government and COSLA will continue to work together to consider wider actions to further strengthen and improve sustainable rate setting. Paragraph 12 reiterates the points and expectations from the Scottish Government that the hourly rate paid to funded providers should reflect the cost of delivery, provide scope for reinvestment and reflect a measure of profit in a private sector setting or surplus in a third sector organisation, and enable delivery of the real living wage commitment. The national guidance also highlights that from a local authority perspective, the rate must be affordable to local authorities in terms of the available budget. Paragraph 13 confirms the Scottish Government commitment to provide funding to uplift pay to at least £12 per hour from April 2024 for those in the private and voluntary sector delivering funded early learning and childcare, anticipating that this commitment would be progressed via the sustainable rate setting process. And paragraph 14 advises that sustainable rate guidance will be updated in time for local authorities to consider the sustainable rate for 2024-25. Taking this into account, it is recommended that the current hourly rate of £5.50 for funded providers and £4.76 for childminders delivering the funded hours and the payment of £3 per meal agreed by Cabinet in September last year continues for the current academic year 23-24. Paragraph 15 notes that on receipt of the revised guidance for 24-25 and taking account of the expected additional funding provided by the Scottish Government to the programme for government commitment delivering the minimum pay rate of £12 an hour, it is then further recommended that a review of the hourly rate and payment for meals is undertaken, with a further report to Cabinet setting out the recommendations for a revised hourly rate for the new academic year 24-25. Paragraph 16 confirms that registered providers also receive a payment per child via the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks Scheme, and paragraph 17 describes the additional support that funded providers receive from the local authority over and above the hourly rate and payments for meals. Paragraphs 19 through 22 provides information on the uptake of funded places in East Ayrshire, including blended places with childminders and cross-boundary places, noting that there's 12% uptake with funded providers and childminders and 88% uptake in early childhood centres. Paragraphs 23 to 48 describe the implications. The most pressing is the financial implication due to the reduction in the specific grant for funded early learning and childcare. These reductions in the ring-fence grant in 22-23 and 23-24 presents a difficulty in setting a rate when the budget allocation for the next financial year is not yet known, and a lack of clarity on the future early learning childcare budget beyond 23-24. The review states that sustainable rates must be sustainable and affordable for local authorities in terms of their overall budget. The review also notes that some local authorities are currently at the limit of affordability regarding the hourly rate, and that they are concerned at the pace of annual rate increases arising from cost inflation, increases to the real living wage, and their continued ability to meet these increases in line with the sustainable rates guidance without an adequate increase in funding. Other risks to affordability include the potential long-term cost of increased numbers of children deferring entry into primary school, the cost of delivering on any expansion to 2-year-old places, and any future pay awards. Paragraph 45 notes the East Ayrshire Performance Report presented to Cabinet on 8th of November last year, which highlighted that the earliest budget is currently anticipated to be 1.84 over budget this financial year, having carried forward a budget pressure of 1.27 million from 2022-23. Finally, while we would wish to increase the hourly rate to our funded providers and childminders for the current academic year, we are not in a position to do so at the current time. That concludes the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any members, any questions, Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. Janie, 2 points from me. I'm really looking for reassurance that the funding for the pay lift in April will be treated separately from the review of the sustainable rates, and that will be issued to providers at the earliest opportunity. And I realise it's been mentioned that the updated guidance on the sustainable rates will be ready for the next term, but that feels a bit vague for me, so I'm wondering if we can get further clarity on that, and if there's any way we can press the Scottish Government or COSLA to accelerate that work to help with forward planning. So 2 points for me, that the pay uplift is going to be separate. We won't wait to the new term to get that updated guidance, and is there any way that we can ask for further clarity on the deadline for that?
Thanks, Elaine. I can actually answer that. I just thought off the press. I think there's we get an agenda in for the COSLA leaders meeting that includes a paper on that. So if that's just that latest information that we have. So hopefully that's certainly in terms of as COSLA goes, that's going to be discussed next week. So.
Oh, thank you. That's very encouraging then. Thank you.
But, Janie, if there's anything else?
Yes, in terms of the guidance, like you, Councillor Cowan, the only information that we have is that what's come out of the review, and the review states that the revised guidance will be available for local authorities to enable them to support the rate setting for 2024-25. We have no timescales provided. I would suggest it might be quite tight for that revised guidance to be available before the end of March. It may be possible, but we would definitely need that guidance in terms of being able to set the rate for August of this year, the new academic year.
Thanks, Jake. Maybe bring Eddie in as well on this.
Yep. So I suppose the comment I would give is, members will be aware that there's already a commitment that the provision for adult social care workers to go to £12 an hour from April next year, and these are registered, workers in terms of children's services, in terms of social care with the SSSC as well. So unless we can bring it, it ends up being a real differential, you know, like between the adult and the children's services in terms of social care workers. So just as been reflected in the conversation, clearly we would want to see, you know, like that brought forward and make sure there's equity there in terms of the different sectors that we see across adult and children's services in terms of social care workers.
Like I said, that's quite helpful. Drew?
Thanks, Chair. Jane, I was contacted by a service provider, and they were saying they were asked to put their costings in for last year, and the council agreed that it was £6.88. I think they came to. It's only now, after 5 months, they're getting to hear the confirmation just what the rate is going to be. I feel that's a wee bit unfair. I do recognise that 24-25, the £12 comes in, there will be talks again to see if there'll be an increase, an uplift in that rate.
That's true. I mean, some of this it's the government, and I appreciate what you're saying, Drew. We're kind of hands are tied a wee bit. Janie?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for your question and comments. When we meet with our funded providers on a minimum of 3 times a year, and when we met with them before the start of term, or just at the start of term of the current academic year, they were advised at that time to plan on the basis that the rate would be as it currently was for the current academic year. And I have met with them again to discuss the rate, and it is recognised that yes, they are disappointed with the rate that's been provided, but it's what we can afford at the current time. In terms of the national standard, we are required to gather in financial information and review that with funded providers to ensure that they're using the funding that they get from the local authority appropriately, which they do, in terms of providing places for children who are eligible for funded early learning and childcare. And for some of those services, the rate to deliver the service is beyond £5.50 an hour. And that is information that we look at in conjunction with them. However, the position is that we can only provide the funding that we have available, and they are aware of that, the current position. In saying that, funded providers, some of them do deliver other services to younger children, or they provide services before the start or after the funded entitlement hours, and they are at liberty to be able to charge parents for those services as part of their business planning. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jenny.
That's Maureen.
Again, thank you. And Elaine, I'm very pleased because we're discussing this on the agenda, but I have to say I don't share your enthusiasm that we are actually going to get the resolution that perhaps we would all seek within East Ayrshire. And certainly, as we're hearing from Janie now, I know that some of our funded providers and childminders would seek. So Janie, what you're actually presenting to us, I think I'm accurately hearing, is that we are one of the authorities where the affordability is actually quite an issue for us. Can you first of all just confirm that that is the case?
Able to answer that a wee bit?
Through you, Chair. We know, and it's been well rehearsed in East Ayrshire Reforms, that we face some financial challenges across council services, one of them being in early years. And it's important that when the report was prepared, and indeed when it lifted certain parts of government guidance, it spoke about that the proposals within the national planning framework are cascaded to local authorities, but in terms of that implementation, that operational plan to implement, there's also a consideration on affordability. And I think it would come as no surprise to you that in terms of our education service as a whole, then we know from East Ayrshire Reforms at Q1 and with Q3 report just being prepared for members in the 7th for the meeting on the 7th of February, that and as touched on by colleagues, the service itself is overspending. So therefore the scope to deliver the proposals and remain within that affordability is then going to be a challenge. So on that basis, then affordability is a factor in terms of delivering the proposals, albeit recognising that we are also in discussions with through the Director of Finance on the distribution of the £16 million that will come nationally to help councils prepare for the £12 uplift to the hourly rate. So that's also taking place concurrently, and we are giving best advice back to COSLA through Director of Finance and through the Settlement Distribution Group on the model that should be used to disburse that money to councils.
Ed, do you want to come on?
Yeah, I suppose, just to share with members, and I think they already know, Jenny's been working on a wider, review of early year service that takes into account a whole range of things. It looks at our demography, it looks at our need, it looks at the balance of care, it looks at staffing, models as well as affordability. So Jenny has been, working on that and working alongside the corporate team in terms of bringing back a full, our picture in terms of, our early year services, as we would anticipate of all the services having to do at this time.
Thanks, Eddie. Maureen, right back.
Yes, again, thank you. Well, I mean, obviously that's something that's important. I suppose if I was sitting at home now and I was looking as a working parent and looking as a working parent to, well, what am I actually going to use in terms of, I've got a hybrid arrangement at the moment in terms of my 1140 hours. Going forward, I need to be planning what it is that I'm actually going to do here. I'm a bit concerned in terms of that here we are, we hear this morning that inflation has increased again, and I'm seeing that there's a hold in terms of what the rates are, albeit, as we've heard, there's going to be an increase in hourly rate funding for funded places and childminders. So I would then be, I think, looking at, well, how am I going to secure my place going forward across the next year? So is this something, Janie, that we're anticipating that we're going to see a shift away potentially from funded providers and childminders into our own service use, just to get a flavour of what actually is the overall thinking and anticipation in relation to us holding the rates here? And I understand completely the situation that we are in affordability. But what I'm really focused on is I'm a working parent, I need childcare. How am I going to do that? And also for us, then in our position, what is potentially the impact going to be on services that are external to the council? And then the kickback from that in terms of services within the council. So quite complex, I understand, but I'm just looking to get a flavour of where we actually are. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Linda, do you want to come in first?
Councillor Reid, I'll maybe come in on the first aspects in Councillor Mackay's questions, because I do appreciate that the remaining parts of that are ultimately Councillor Mackay around about council-wide services and the anticipation of the uplift in the hourly rate per se. Councillor Mackay, as you'll note from Janie's paper, signed off myself, we do have clearly a number of young people that rely on either the full funded provision or a hybrid model, and actually in relation to other local authorities, we actually have a very small number of funded providers with, I think if I'm correct from the paper, a 12% vis-a-vis an 88% split. So ultimately the vast majority of the early years provision in East Ayrshire actually comes from our own centres in that particular space. I think, yes, you absolutely do outline the issues that Joe's already discussed in respect of affordability, but the hope would be that clearly once more is known in the fiscal space vis-a-vis COSLA or indeed the other matters in hand, ref the £12 per hour, and as Eddie states, how that will also affect adult services. We would hope there would be no diminution in terms of the availability of such models to parents, but ultimately, as will be all things fiscal as we approach budget time, it'd be difficult to put an exact sort of marker on that one. But I think it would be right to say we would be putting every effort in to sustain a good level of flexibility for parents where we possibly can, but recognising that as an authority we do have a very, very small number of funded providers in comparison potentially to other local authorities in this space. So I hope that answers perhaps the education specific part of the question. I'll maybe refer back to Leader, if I may, through you, Leader, in respect of the more council-wide aspects potentially for Joe or Eddie.
Thanks. Joe, I don't know if you want to further comment.
I think at this point in time we are examining the current in-year budget and financial resources and the impacts and interdependencies across council services. We are doing a more detailed analysis of the draft budget for next year. What we do know and what's been shared with members already at a very high level is that population shift that was discussed by Chief Exec, Deputy Chief Exec and myself during the budget engagement events has begun. That while that was planned for, it has resulted and will result in some stark choices as we go forward. But it's about providing those integral services to the communities that we serve, and at the same time having that review of the services provided and the linkages across council services. But that's essentially where we are in that undertaking, that whenever decisions are made, whether they be operational decisions during the year or decisions taken as part of the budget, that the consequential impacts of those decisions, both on our residents and on our businesses, but also on services in the council, is always at the forefront of our minds, and that does not change as we go forward too. So there will be changes, members. There will be challenges as we begin to wade through the changes in population and that demographic. But be assured that as we do that, as a collective council management team, we will do that in a way that will safeguard services, but at the same time ensure that those interdependencies are understood, modelled and reacted to.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, if there's no other comments, questions, can we go to recommendations? Can we agree on recommendations? Okay, on to our final E item, and that's ASN Holiday Support Progress Report, and Kevin at the back will present this paper.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the report in front of you this morning aims to provide an update on the work undertaken by the Council and its partners in the delivery of the 2023 holiday ASN Summer Support Programme and seek agreement on proposals for 2024 provision. Members, in terms of some background in relation to this paper itself, we as a council delivers an extensive out-of-school holiday activity programme for children and young people across the authority, and following some changes following pandemic in 2022, there were operational changes to how that focused around about additional support needs children, and subsequently there was some feedback from elected members, chief officers and parents in relation to that work. The council commissioned the Alliance Health and Social Care Partnership to review our provision for ASN services out with school. And a report was presented to Cabinet on the 23rd of April 2023. As a result of that review and feedback, there was a working group established to look at those recommendations from that report, with a particular focus around about holiday provision for 2023, given the timescales involved. Cabinet agreed to go into a negotiated contract with Aberlour, Scotland's children's charity, to work with us in the delivery of 2023's holiday provision for ASN pupils. The holiday programme operated throughout the month of July last year, supported by Aberlour, delivered within Hillside, Willowbank and Crosshouse Communications Centre, aimed at supporting those children and young people who require higher levels of support and care. Additionally, there was a provision made for children and young people with additional support needs at Park School. These children and young people, although having additional support needs, did not necessarily require personal care. And also this work was delivered in connection, working alongside health and social care partners, disability team, looking at programmes such as that was delivered at the Treehouse at Dean Park. The programme made use of our existing workforce, namely classroom assistants, and utilised our own facilities in the delivery, ensuring that that principle of familiar faces and familiar places was at the heart of the delivery last year, and utilising the resources at Park School and social work and delivery as well, making sure that there was as much of a joined up approach as we could have going forward. I think it is also critical to recognise the extensive support provided in the establishment of this programme by colleagues within education services, in particular our teaching colleagues within our special schools, who have the deepest and fullest reaching relationship with the families of almost all our children with additional support needs. The summer provision in 2023 was offered out in excess of 150 children and young people, and their families were supported through that programme, and feedback so far has been extremely positive. As part of the provision, Aberlour undertook a review of that holiday programme, and a copy of that evaluation, which took feedback from children, parents and staff, can be found within Appendix 1 of this report. Members, starting at paragraph 11, going into some of that feedback, parents and children and young people indicated that the programme last year was fun. Children enjoying being supported in surroundings that were accustomed to, and staff familiar to them. In terms of the programme, families also indicated that it relieved some pressure on them over this holiday period, which we previously heard that can be quite stressful for them. But they did indicate that they would like to see that programme extended further. The positive report responses from parents were relayed in terms of when senior officers met with parents post the holiday provision. They did highlight a number of areas that the programme supported their children, including that learning readiness for when returning back to school in August. And parents also did give constructive feedback of areas that would prefer enhancement in terms of future offers, and they're listed in the points in paragraph 12. Parents also indicated that whilst a snack was made available to the children and young people, and this was welcomed, the specialist requirements for their children in terms of the food, they would be much more content in delivering packed lunches personally in the future, which would also maybe help the sustainability of the programme going forward, as well as a willingness to volunteer and a support in the delivery of the programme. Members, in terms of 2024 provision, outlined in paragraphs 14 to 16, it highlights that Aberlour has indicated that they'd be willing to support the council going forward in terms of the delivery of 2024 provision, and this continuation would give sufficient grounds for us to consider all aspects of future service delivery in terms of any future commissioning of that service. Mainly in terms of two particular areas, that bit around about the care inspectorate registration, which we piggybacked on the back of Aberlour's registration last year. This would give us the groundings to seek our own and what that would be for future providers, as well as looking at the the readiness or availability of staff to work in this area. We would extend out to existing staff, but actually in terms of the market out there, in terms of supplementing to extend the programme further. And the other bit in terms of this report is any future provision that was proposed in here would be able to be financed using existing funds already allocated to this work stream. Members, in terms of implications, they're outlined from paragraphs 17 to 29, but I would, 17 to 29, but I would like to highlight in terms of human resource implications, in terms of our use of staff, that tends to be working alongside classroom assistants who take up additional appointments. Should there be a delay to the delivery of this programme, it may make that recruitment process more challenging for future. In terms of this work, the financial implications, members, the 2023 holiday provision cost in the region of £85,000, predominantly associated with Aberlour's cost of delivery. The additional provisions within Part School that was delivered were partially funded using the Council's Sport Scotland investment for active schools, and it would be planned that that provision would be mainstreamed going forward. In terms of the proposed to extend the delivery to Aberlour in paragraph 24, it is anticipated that planned increase of offer through the summer and extension into October week holidays would be funded utilising the remaining 165,000 that was previously approved by Cabinet in the 2023-24 budget settlement. Members, in terms of this report, just to conclude, it does highlight a very successful 2023 holiday provision delivered in partnership with Aberlour. This work did help to heal some of the relationship damage that occurred from previous year's holiday provisions with local parents, all being delivered within the allocated budget. There is an opportunity to expand on the Council's learning from this initial delivery year. This will assist us to understand better some of the key delivery priorities around about that recruitment element that I'd mentioned, and in terms of care inspectorate registration. The offer from Aberlour to continue with the Council on this journey for a further year, expanding the pilot would be advantageous and provide the Council with the required knowledge for shaping future commissioning. Members, the recommendations are in paragraph 2 of the report.
Thanks, Kevin. I think most would concur with your assertion that, I think what we saw last year was much improved offer to the parents and to the kids. And that hopefully we can take some of this learning forward, and I think that's what the paper's all about. But I'm sure there'll be plenty of comment there. I can see Elaine and Barry wanting already. Elaine, then Barry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very pleased to see the progress with the SN holiday provision as outlined in the report. I know it's times, especially last year, I must have been a real thorn in the side of the Chief Executive and the strategic lead for communities, but it does feel that we're moving in the right direction with this. For me, it is still very much a journey that we're on, so I'm fully on board with extending the pilot with Aberlour to deliver this year's programme. That will also offer us, as Kevin outlined, the chance for a deeper dive into understanding the funding challenges and the possibilities beyond 2024. I'm also conscious that time was against us last year, so hopefully with approval today we can have much earlier engagement, both with the staff and the recruitment process and the families for the forward planning. I know the recommendations doesn't actually specify a future report, but my assumption would be that after this year's summer we would get an update on the extended pilot and also how we would look at developing this service going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. That we continue to build on what we're achieving here and reflect on how this year's programme goes. So maybe could be something into recommendation where continues to update Cabinet in a regular basis. Barry.
Thanks, Chair, and just following on from what Councillor Cowan has said, I absolutely welcome her comments there, and I think that's absolutely right. We should have additional recommendation that I'd be more than happy to support in relation to a further paper. Time has been against us in the past, and I know that we're in early January and the summer holidays seem a very long way away, particularly with the weather we're having at the moment. But the reality is it will be upon us before we know where we are, and particularly for staff and to reassure parents as well. We know that certainly a number of particular needs of some of the pupils, they need to have things planned well in advance. So we need to know those familiar faces will be there because that's really important. And I think we need to make sure we're continuing to engage with parents during this process. This isn't just a, here's what we're going to do, and then it's sprung upon them, at the summer. I think that's really, really important. And I would urge that from today, assuming this is supported, the members that we are able to do that and move forward, because as Kevin has rightly said, I think there was some real reputational damage done and some real relationship damage has been done until last year. And I think we can only build on that. But you're right, Elaine, we need to look at this pilot and very quickly, I think as an authority, make some decisions on what's going to happen going forward. But I'm really pleased to see this is continuing and would ask, that additional recommendation be included.
Thanks, Barry. Anyone else? No.
Just a quick comment.
Jim, certainly.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to add my thanks to everybody that worked on this. It came across for bows quick. I think with the introduction of the services that we brought in, taking away a lot of the pressures that we came under, and some of the feedback looking at how we extend this right out through the year, not just the summer holidays. I think with the drive and ambition, I think East Ayrshire could be an exemplar model in Scotland. If we keep this going and keep pushing for kids with assisted needs out through not just the summer holidays, but right out through the year. So again, just to explain my gratitude to everybody involved in providing the service.
Thanks, Jim. I think we could cover with that. Maureen.
Thanks very much. And again, I would just concur with what's already been said. Could I also make a further suggestion? And again, it is adding on that sense of being an exemplar and how we actually achieve that on an overall basis. So if we're going to have then this further report coming forward, after we have had another year of service from Aberlour, which I certainly support, then could I also ask that we, as well as having the report from Aberlour, we also at that time bring in the parents who have actually used the service so that they are actually directly involved in the presentation of the report, and we can actually then hear directly from them at that particular stage. I think that would be a very thorough way of us concluding this 2-year work programme that we then will have undertaken. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, I would kind of agree with that in terms of, and one of the things is as well thank our officers for some of the hard work they put in. I know that part of that has been a strong consultation exercise with the parents, and I really appreciate the input from them as well. But maybe bring Eddie in as well.
Thanks, and just to give the reassurance to members and to parents, like Kevin and I met with the Health and Social Care Alliance pre-Christmas. We'd given the commitment, they'd done the initial report, we'd done delivery in partnership with Aberlour, that the Health and Social Care Alliance would come back in and speak directly, to the parents, to the young people, etc., and actually do a feedback, session, in terms of that is. So in terms of the report that we can bring back here, that report will be informed by the Health and Social Care Alliance being more independent and actually taking that feedback. The actual parents, etc., being involved in that, we're very open to, and how we do that in terms of them being directly involved. But the initial thing is to actually make sure people are able to give that open and honest feedback in an independent way, is us engaging again with the Health and Social Care Alliance. Indeed, the initial report they did, they published more widely, on the web. And, you know, it does show that they're a council that, you know, we're open to learn and we're open to listen to what, you know, like our like residents, constituents as yourself are actually saying to us. So that report coming back will be informed by the parents and people who both work in and use the service when it comes back. And we can talk about the presentation then at that time of how people are involved.
Thanks, Eddie. I think that's helpful. So just to be clear, I had a further recommendation about a further report, you know, following the experience of this year's programme, informed by the parents and utilising the Healthcare Alliance, and you know, looking to involve the parents in some way in that presentation and take that decision at that time when we're drafting that paper. Okay, can we add that as a further recommendation? Okay, can we agree on that? Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, that's the end of the education items, and we'll let members, education spokespersons leave at this stage. Right, nice to see you. Okay, still got a number of interesting items. No more than the next item, which is the pavement parking enforcement, and Kevin is going to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the introduction of the new parking prohibitions contained within the Transport Scotland Act 2019 and the measures required for the implementation of enforcement procedures. Part 6 of the Transport Scotland Act 2019 introduced the statutory framework for a national ban on pavement parking, double parking and parking at drop curbs to make it easier for local authorities to ensure pavements and roads are safer and more accessible to all. Although the Transport Scotland Act 2019 has been enacted, secondary legislation which enables local authorities to take up enforcement powers was only laid down in the Scottish Parliament in December 2023, and further enforcement guidance is scheduled to be published in January 2024. Exemptions which allow pavement parking apply to emergency services and medical practitioners responding to emergencies, accidents, or in the normal course of their duties. Further exemptions apply to postal service providers in the course of the collection and delivery of goods which cannot be achieved without the vehicle being parked on a pavement. There are also exemptions for vehicles used in connection with roadworks and the removal of obstructions. The Act further allows for the promotion of exemption orders to specific locations, applying strict criteria. Consideration can be given to exempt a street or parts of a street if the pavement is of sufficient width to allow 1.5 metres to remain unobstructed when any part of a vehicle is parked in it. The width of the carriageway associated with the pavement is such that any vehicle parked in it would obstruct an emergency vehicle. To establish whether exemption orders should be considered, a desktop study will be carried out on all of the streets in each town and actual on-site surveys, and a 3-tiered assessment has been encouraged by the Parking Standards Working Group. Appraisals will be used in the street assessments to establish the need for physical mitigation measures for amber streets and formal exemption orders for red streets. It is proposed that a report be brought to a future Cabinet on the resultant road assessments, seeking approval where physical mitigation measures and/or exemptions to pavement parking prohibitions and double parking prohibitions are to be considered. Transport Scotland are aware and accept that not all local authorities will be in a position to commence enforcement from December, and a national awareness campaign has commenced which focuses on the effects of pavement parking and highlights that there may be the possibility of a penalty from December. Pending the commencement of formal enforcement, we will continue to raise awareness using materials issued by Pavement Parking Road Safety Scotland on behalf of Transport Scotland via the ARA website and social media communications. There are numerous other tasks which need to be progressed along with the street assessments to enable the commencement of enforcement duties, and the existing parking database which is used to process PCNs and any associated appeals is currently configured in accordance with the Road Traffic Act 91 for PCNs issued under the existing DPE regime. New PCNs issued under the Transport Scotland Act 2019 will require separate arrangements. There will also be significant human resource implications in terms of incorporating the new task and associated workload through service review and training. And any exemption orders shall also require the manufacture, installation of associated road traffic signs and road markings. Having considered all the various tasks which are further detailed within the table in Appendix 1, and provided there is no public hearing or other unforeseen circumstances, ARA are currently working towards a target implementation date of the 28th of October 2024, and the recommendations are contained in paragraph 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm sure this will be controversial in some ways in many areas. This report will be something will be welcomed in others. So just, I think one of the key bits that you just mentioned right at the start there was the exemption report. When, it's really important. Some areas where I think we're really struggling to get alternative solutions, and no name them here, but every town and every village has got them. When do you hope to have that report? I think we're talking about October for the date of implementation. When do you think of having that report, Kevin, and how can tell us just a wee bit about the process in terms that's involved?
Through you, Chair. So what we have to do is, as I said in the presentation, is we have to survey every street in East Ayrshire, every street, and then we have to look at these streets not only during the day, but we have to look at them in the evenings, because people come home from work, and then that's where you get most cars parked in streets. So we have to carry out that piece of work. Then we have to then assess these areas. Is there an impact? Is there an issue with pavement parking in that particular street? No, so that would be a green. Is there an issue with a particular street that has some issues in it? Then that would be an amber. And then a red street would be one where it would be physically impossible not to park in the pavement, to allow emergency vehicles down, etc. To put the exemption in place, we would then have to promote traffic regulation orders, and that can take a considerable amount of time. So there is a lot of work to do, but we have to use the criteria that's laid down by Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. It's a short paper, Kevin, but the implications are wide and varied, both on the pedestrian and on the road user, and also as elected members, and the perception of the public and how we implement enforcement on this. I only yesterday had 3 cases running about parking. Constituents sent me. I can only imagine with the perception of this, when this car's parked on the pavement, it shouldn't be, that our workload's going to increase massively. So I think to go hand in hand with that, I think the resources need to be there to accommodate the perceptions of the public on this. And I think we currently sit with 7 enforcement officers. I know some authorities sit with none to try and implement this. For me, there's going to be massive additional costs in this, and it can't be just at the expense within marine budget. I think we need to look at it, especially for the first year, how this is funded, and we know about the enforcement issues on that. The survey and the artificial intelligence that's going to be used on that, and the analysis after the back, I think is really important. Taking cognizance, and you've touched on that, about how we survey the roads both during the day, because in their rural locations, folk can be away at their work, but when they're back home at night, in the rural locations, you're going to get that. And we're saying the town centres during the day, it could be busier with folk parking going to work. So there's massive implications in it for me. I think 1 or 2 things that I need it kind of clarified was about where would you have about the concept of where people are parking on pavements at both sides of the road, but we might can accommodate them on one side of the road where we can. And I know certain streets in my own ward where it's a bus route that we couldn't do that, and where we talk about accommodating them with off-road parking some ways, looking at green spaces and putting in parking areas like that, because there's massive implications. I think the £54,000 that sets out the assessment process and whatnot, I'll just cover it. But it's the wider implications coming off the back of that and how we're looking at
it. Through you, Chair. Yeah. Absolutely, it's a massive task that we need to carry out, and I should have said to Councillor Reid that the paper would probably come around about the summer, the time that we pull all that information together. There is £54,000 allocated from Scottish Government to us at this moment in time, but that won't touch it. I mean, it's a small amount of money. We will put in further bids to Scottish Government for grant funding to support this, but how successful we will be. We wouldn't generate any income coming into the service until we actually get the enforcement all set up. And you're right, there would be areas that we would have to create parking bays and stuff like that, so we need to look at a way of how we're going to fund this.
Thanks, Kevin. Got a couple of, we've got Claire and Barry. Claire first.
Thank you very much. And following on from what Jim said, I don't want to add any more. Just one thing when we're talking about exemptions. I'm sitting here watching the chaos of the town outside, and we have lots and lots of carers out there with cars trying to attend to our people in the town centres, in old streets, and I would like to see some form of exemption for our health and social care carers. Thank you very much.
Through you, Chair, there would be exemptions for medical practitioners, etc. That's in the legislation.
Okay, but we want to make sure carers are included in that category. Barry.
Thanks, Chair. And just Councillor Maitland's actually just raised the first point I wanted to raise was in relation to our carers, and I think whilst medical professionals are included, I think we need to make sure that's absolutely abundantly clear. They do some of the heavy work really that some of our other medical professionals maybe aren't doing, but they aren't always treated the same. Let's be honest, in public opinion as well. So I think it's vital that they are given that exemption. I welcome it. I'm far from surprised that the Scottish Government haven't given us enough funding for it, particularly for year one. And I get that the thought process here will be that in the future, of course, this will be self-funding. I welcome the fact that we are also looking at exemption areas. I know there are some councils who are going for a blanket approach and saying no exemption areas. Can't see how that will work, in my own opinion, particularly knowing the towns and villages and the communities of East Ayrshire. I think the important thing will be here that we do need to have people in the evenings. And I know for a fact we're going to have people sending elected members photos and the like. So I think a key point here, I'm assuming it would be in the same way as any other traffic infringement or parking infringement, whereby the wardens would need to see it, and we can't just rely on people's second-hand information, although that might inform where enforcement officers are going. In relation to the legislation, whilst it's been well trailed that this is now in place, of course, and I will name a street or area after the Starry Nights started at the Dean Park, of course, the Monday when the legislation kicked in, I was inundated with people saying, here's photos of people parking on pavements, surely this shouldn't be happening, what is the council doing about it? But of course, trying to explain to people that it is then for the local authority to deal with that separately and to implement a policy is difficult. And you can understand because the media are portraying this ban's now in place and the public don't realise it. So we aren't able to do that yet. So I welcome the timescales, although I do know that it's hardly a surprise. We knew it was coming. But I think to get it right, we will take time. My other point I really wanted to make was on the Appendix 1, which is the task list and timeline, item 7, we've got consult statutory bodies. We should not really be doing that before we go out to public consultation, Kevin. The reason I ask is there may be a view that the public have in terms of a particular street, in terms of parking, but the fire brigade and police ambulance will be saying absolutely not, because we need to get in here and we need to have a turning head there. And I think it's just important that maybe we do that first. There's no point in leading the public up a garden path if we maybe haven't spotted something that the emergency services have. If you can just come back on that.
Thanks, Barry.
Through you, Chair, the normal process is to consult at that stage as part of the order promoting process. But we could have discussion. We carry out a liaison meeting with Police Scotland all the time, so we could weave that discussion into that regular meeting that we have with them.
I think that would be helpful, Kevin, if you did just as early as we can, early notice as we can. I think that would be, that's a good point. Elaine?
Well, thank you, Chair, and that's quite good time. I want to pick up on the point about our communication plans. Once we've identified any pinch points, is our intention to involve residents groups in that area and community councils, just for that whole public awareness. I know the paper talks about the national campaign and everything, but I think especially if we've got some amber or red areas identified as part of the survey, that might be a useful exercise.
Yeah, where we've got bodies there, I agree that to get them behind this campaign would be helpful. Elaine, yeah.
Yeah, and just one further point of interest. I noticed online that one local authority is looking at a process of advisory notices as a lead into this. So again, because we're talking about behavioural change here, I think these are things that are worth considering as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. John, sorry, John didn't see a hand up. John McFadden.
Yes, I mean, obviously most of what needs to be said is being said, but the likes of when we're making these assessments, you're making the assessment to the minimum standards. So you've got parked cars on both sides of the road, and theoretically you can get two buses just to pass. If the driver's concentrating without, hitting the parked cars. I'm not sure it's legislation, but during the driving tests and things like that, and driving schools and driving tests, they say you should leave at least a metre when you're passing a parked vehicle. So basically, if someone happens to open a door or get out or something, and that way, if you actually, include that meter you're supposed to leave on both sides of the road passing the parked vehicles, huge numbers of the roads then theoretically wouldn't be suitable not to allow on pavement parking, because you wouldn't want to force two vehicles to pass the parked cars with only maybe a foot and a half space either side, which technically you could do, because it's only going to take someone to open a door, and then there's going to be catastrophes, because we could cause as much accidental, injuries to people and stuff as we're trying to avoid by doing this. It seems really a very hard policy to implement, except on the really widest of streets. I was trying to actually look up there to see if the 1 metre that the driving school instructors all tell you, and the driving test examiners say that you should leave passing a parked vehicle is a legal thing. But whether or not it's legal, it's put down in black and white as that's what you should leave. So you got two parked cars, one on each side of the street, and then another 2 metres. Not many roads are wide enough to actually accommodate that. I don't know where you go with this. I think you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And I just would like to make sure we're not endangering members of the public, as in people getting out of their cars or stepping out between cars. And, if the cars passing are so close to the cars that people are stepping out between, or stepping out behind a van, a metre gives people a chance to see it and swerve. If you're driving 2 feet, a foot away from the parked vehicle, and someone steps out, there's no way you're going to react. I actually think this whole thing is absolutely crazy. Anyway, sorry about the long ramble, but that's my point of view.
Thanks, John. No, thanks for your comments. I think there is some elements, damned if you do, damned if you don't, is fairly accurate. Because we've got to remember why this policy is coming in, because some of the obstructions that some users find in pavements, and it's just trying to get that kind of balance. Is I think what we're trying to achieve. But your points in terms of health and safety, we've got to make sure that's achieved. Listen, take from me, I parked my car when I used to stay in Irvine Road in Kilmarnock. When my car was parked, within 1 year I had 3 cars written off. just stationary. I don't live there anymore, but no, I understand since then there's been road improvements been made, but just shows you, some of the kind of some of the issues that happen for people that are on that road. But I think it's a very good point you make, Kevin. I don't know if I've got Jim and Drew want to come in. Do you want to answer some of Councillor McFadden's points just now?
Through you, Chair, I mean, it comes down to every street. We have to look at every street and apply common sense to what's actually happening in that street. But what I would say is, I would rather have the pavement parking process than forcing mothers with buggies and folk in wheelchairs having to go onto the carriageway to access a particular street.
Thanks, Kevin. Drew, then Jim.
Thanks, Chair. A huge task for Kevin and Ayrshire Road Alliance. It'll take a fair bit of time. And I don't want to add to his work, but just when they're doing the survey, I just wondered, I've spoke to Kevin before about this. I can remember back to Dolmellit, way back in the early 60s and 70s. There was actually a sign on the lamppost. It was a black sign with a white cross across it. I hear that, a black with white cross along it. And that was the only side of the street you could actually park on. Okay, there were no as many cars in the days, but we need to get back to that side of things, Ken. I've got streets there where they can't even get the bucket lorry down. Folks go to bring their bins for the bottom of the street away to the top of the street because they're parked on both sides. So we need to get tougher the wee bits of council here and let's get it onto the one side of the street where possible. It can't always be possible, but where possible, just when they're doing the survey, to see if we could look at that what we're in sign to say and let folk know that's the side of the street you park on. I think it would help a lot in a lot of our wee villages.
Thanks, Drew. No, I think you're right. This isn't going to be easy at all, but we've just, we've got to remember why we're doing it and just trying to make it as common sense as we can. Jim?
Thanks, yeah. I think I said it outset last time that the implications of this are wide and varied, and there will be, but for me, pedestrian safety is really crucial round about this and keeping the cars off the pavement. I know recently in a survey myself that I took at one of our schools and I saw pavement parking and near misses with folk reversing on the pavement. The schools are coming out, it's bad enough when they do it at normal time, but round about schools is really deplorable. It's got to be difficult. I don't think we'll underestimate the task that's in front of us to deliver this, but I think it's certainly the right thing to do and off the back of the survey and hopefully getting it right. Everybody was going to have an opinion on this, where exemptions should be, and I dare say we'll look at every application that's made for exemptions and consider different ones as they come in. I think it's really important that we get the PR right round about this, and it's going out. I know, Kevin, you mentioned the national campaign in the paper, and I've had a look, and so far I don't see anything that jumps out in me in national campaigns that's out there. I think it's not just a local campaign, it's got to be national. I mean, I've had discussions with yourself around about pedestrian safety with some of the new laws that's been put in. It's not to do with parking, but it's pedestrians crossing at junctions where they do have the right to cross there, and the drivers should give way, but they don't. And for me, that's down to the PR around about that national campaigns. So that's I know it's a massive task.
Thanks, Jim. I think we agree. It's a huge task for the Roads Alliance to do, but wish them all the best. Neil.
Thanks very much. I was just wondering if there's any sort of prioritising certain areas or certain streets. Obviously, there's a huge scheme of work that you need to complete. Is there any way for members of the public feeding into that work to help guide you in where the problem areas are? And do you have a kind of working model of the system that you're going to use to identify the streets, or how you're going to go through maybe starting in one ward and then ending at the last ward, or how are you actually going to go about doing it?
I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm quite sure as this gets a bit of publicity, our inboxes are going to get very busy, and we know the kind of areas where it's going to come from. Is there one particular place we can collect these all and get all that information to you, Kevin? How do we collect all this?
Through you, Chair, and answer to the questions from Councillor Ingram. There is criteria that we have to use, and that will be the criteria that we will apply across the whole of East Ayrshire. And I'm also doing the same task down the road as well, so it's double done here. However, the best way that we have ascertained that we can do it is by using the artificial intelligence cameras in our inspection vehicles, and we will use when the inspectors are out doing their routine inspections. The information will be gathered, and we will then have to download all that information and review it. So we see that as the best way to do it, to sort of kick it off. We will have to send officers out to actually on the ground in the evenings and stuff like that to look at it as well. We can set up a mailbox within ARA, and we'll call it pavement parking, and everything can get sent into that. So I'll get the team to set up a pavement parking mailbox. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. We know that Somerset Park's that wee bit quieter, but we'd like you to prioritise where you can. No, it's a big task, and it's good. It's good. They'll be learning from all the areas right across Ayrshire. Just looking at solutions. So maybe that's one of the advantages of having that. No harm meant to United supporters in that coffee. Okay. We'll look forward with interest, because there's going to be a lot of discussion on this. I'm sure that's not the last time we'll hear about this. And Kevin, were you suggesting before or after the recess? When do you think we'll have a report back?
Before recess.
We've got some deadline there, Kevin. So there's a bit of work to be done. So that's actually quite a good thing, because if we're implementing in October, we need to get that information as soon as. Okay, can we agree recommendations? Okay, and next item, Karen Flooding.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to advise Cabinet on the implications of the revised National Planning Framework 4 on future development in East Ayrshire, and the implications of the ongoing Scottish Government and COSLA funding review on current and future proposed actions in the Ayrshire Local Flood Risk Management Plan Cycles 2 and 3. There are 6 recommendations set out in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 sets out the general background, and that flooding has been a long-standing problem in East Ayrshire. Climate change is anticipated to increase the incidence of flooding. How the Council responds to the challenge of flood risk will therefore have a significant bearing on regeneration and will impact on economic growth within flood-affected areas. It is essential, therefore, that we take a proactive approach to mitigating risk and seeking solutions. Paragraphs 4 to 5 set out the detail of the Ayrshire Flood Management Plan, which was published in 2021, and the local plan district flood plans. The main source of funding for flood schemes is through the Scottish Government, as submissions are subject to national appraisal and prioritisation through SEPA flood risk management strategies and local flood risk management plans. At Cabinet on the 15th of February last year, a report was presented on the Ayrshire Flood Risk Management Plan Cycle 2. A River Irvine flood protection scheme costing £29 million was submitted to the Government for prioritisation in December 2019, but it did not secure funding. There are currently 30 schemes prioritised above it, above the Irvine Valley flood study, making it unlikely to attract any future funding in its current form, and meaning we can't progress with any mitigation works. Paragraphs 6 to 10 of the report set out the planning context. National Planning Framework 4, adopted in February last year, sets out the Government's vision to achieve a net zero sustainable Scotland by 2045. One key change introduced by NPF4 has been the integration of flood risk posed by future climate change into planning policy. This means that no new development will be supported in the future functional floodplain. That means the existing floodplain plus climate change predictions based on river flows 60 years from now. Prior to National Planning Framework 4, SEPA recommended a universal 20% allowance for climate change. With an updated position means that climate change uplifts for the Clyde River Basin region, which includes us, are now calculated at 49% for peak river flow allowance and 41% for peak rainfall intensity allowance. And what this does is it makes a difference to the area calculated to be at future risk. So now, even where a site is not within the future functional floodplain, if it is surrounded by land that will be in 2080, SEPA will object to its development. The planning implications of this are set out in paragraphs 12 to 15. As a result of the change, there will now be sites in East Ayrshire that were previously considered to be developable that may now need to be re-evaluated because of anticipated risk later this century. South Central Kilmarnock is one of the areas most affected, as can be seen in Appendix 1. The new policy context means that SEPA are now likely to formally object to any proposals for new buildings in this area, and indeed development in the future functional floodplain. Any developed site currently at risk of flooding under the 1 to 200 plus climate change allowances can achieve a new consent for a use of equal or lesser vulnerability, meaning that it remains developable. However, any existing developed site proposed for redevelopment where demolition may take place prior to planning consent being secured, or any vacant brownfield site without an existing consent will be treated as undevelopable by SEPA. As part of the work that we've been doing with the key agencies, including SEPA, meetings have taken place with the Planning Authority, SEPA and Ayrshire Roads Alliance to consider what is possible in South Central Kilmarnock and in terms of how we jointly manage regeneration and flood risk. With SEPA, officers have discussed updating the River Irvine flood study because the SEPA flood maps, whilst having a degree of accuracy, are not accurate down to local level, and variations will not be caught by the blanket intensity allowance that's across the entire Clyde region. So improved information at local level will allow ARA and the Planning Authority to make informed, sound decisions based on an accurate local evidence and data with a sound understanding of risks and potential consequences. Given the current Irvine Valley scheme's prioritisation ranking nationally and the number of schemes prioritised ahead of us, it's very unlikely that we are going to receive funding for our study in its current form. So if we update the studies, the Council are more likely to secure funding in Cycle 3, which is in 2034, and potentially through other avenues for smaller schemes. In addition to updating the study, there are a number of further proactive steps that we can take to mitigate further blight. It's proposed that landowners in specific areas, including South Central Kilmarnock, are alerted to the implications of the new policy via letter, and that standing advice is placed on our website, and that we promote early pre-application discussions with anyone in affected areas who has a development proposal. There are areas of brownfield land which are unattractive and uncared for, which are affected by this policy, particularly in South Central Kilmarnock. Whilst joint working being undertaken with the key agencies group has considered a number of short, medium and long-term steps, the new policy position means that any interventions other than water-compatible uses are unlikely to be supported by SEPA, at least in the short term. Whilst updating the flooding study will be our first step to seeing whether there is scope to develop any of the brownfield sites, the reality may be that, at least in the short to medium term, there is no scope to build on these sites. And as we face up to the climate emergency, we will increasingly need to adapt our thinking and the design of our spaces. While sites in South Central are in private ownership, they adversely impact upon the attractiveness of our town. And as such, it's proposed that proactive work with the key agencies continues on the pilot project in South Central Kilmarnock, with next steps including meeting the owners of various sites in order that options for improving the appearance of those sites will be explored. In terms of next steps, it's proposed that RPS Ireland, who conducted the original study, are directly awarded a contract to update the study, and cost estimates for this are between 60,000 and 80,000. I've spoken a lot about the implications through the course of the report, but I just want to pick out some of the reasons why it's important to do this study now, despite the funding cycle being in 2034. So in terms of the policy implications, the evidence that we would get through the study will help us to support development to regenerate brownfield sites potentially. So because we'll have that additional data, it'll mean that when we have planning applications, we might have the data to help us to support approval rather than refusal of them, which would be the kind of status quo. In terms of Local Development Plan 3, although obviously we're just trying to get to the point of adopting LDP 2, in late 2024 we will have to submit an evidence report to the government, which will be part of the new cycle of the plan, and that looks at the infrastructure that we've got in place at the moment. That plan will run from 2029 for 10 years, so that will be the LDP that's in place when we are looking for funding from the government through cycle 3. So we need the evidence to support the plan, which will in turn hopefully support the study. And also by doing this study now, we help to ensure that we can continue to work with the key agencies on the work in South Central Kilmarnock. Paragraph 26 just looks at the financials and the cost of the study, and feasibility updates would be sourced initially from ARA capital budgets, whilst we awaited confirmation on potential receipt of capital monies from the Scottish Government. So Kevin, David and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Karen. It's an excellent report, and I know this affects the whole of East Ayrshire, number of towns from Dunmellan to Galston, but for me, the consequences for this for Kilmarnock are significant. Particularly, the post-industrial site. It's almost like a half-mile ban from the Belfield roundabout to Moorfield roundabout. This land, which is all former industrial textile industry, where it was a powerhouse of the country in the Victorian times, and again we seem to be getting that's why Kilmarnock exists where it does, and the Kilmarnock water isn't naturally straight. That was, I think, the textile industry helped that process and took any kind of meanders out some of these rivers that would have naturally otherwise maybe reduced the impact of flooding on the area. So it's there's been in the West Coast with high rainfall and been post-industrial. Really is their own is going to be subject to flood more than perhaps our coastal neighbours in Ayr and Irvine are the same size. They don't have flooding to this extent or anything like it. It's mainly coastal. So we've got a real issue here that we need to address, and let's not kid ourselves when there's no money coming from government for flood mitigation or anything like it just now. Because there's bigger issues, and this even like a Grangemouth requires we need that money up in its entirety if we're really to look at this. But we still need to have that conversation with government, because I don't think this local authority and their communities can afford to just let this ground be blighted in some way because of taking preventative steps for what's going to happen in 60 years' time. And we've got to remember that this is what's going to happen. Your projections, it's what's going to happen in 60 years' time. But we've seen the extension. 10 years ago, we moved from 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 event, and we saw extension of the floodplain. Then, my goodness, this has extended even further. The whole, both sides of King Street and as well, right down the town centre, are affected in this. When we look at the maps. So there's a big issues there for us. I've already written to the Government Minister with our concerns about it. But I think, we've got an opportunity with LDP2 to look at this, and I think we also we're not the only ones experiencing this. I know that other towns in England, for example, particular old mill towns like Wigan, it was one that was drawn to my attention, and Sheffield as well, that have had similar issues. These towns involved where they were because of water and fast flowing water, and they've got the similar issues in terms of flooding events that we have. So I think there's a lot of learning out there that we can benefit from. So I think that can maybe filter into our LDP2 strategy that we're developing at the moment, and there's an opportunity there. So I think there's loads of work to be done here. I don't think we can sit by passively and just accept this. There's challenges here. There's also challenges in our communities too. We can't forget them either. And I'm quite aware of some of the issues that's in development in Dunmellan just now, as we're hoping to develop the town there as well. But it affects other towns as well. But I think we have a particular issue in South Central Kilmarnock, which is the main industrial use area and most commercial active area in the authority. So I think we really need some engagement with the government ministers and, if necessary, academics or any other local authorities or COS or whatever, where people maybe have some kind of knowledge and able to tackle this on a local basis. But there's a challenge there for us, and don't want to be too negative about it, but it's been hard to. Don't want to overstate just the significance of this, but it is a problem we really must face head on. Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I think there is an element of risk. There's always an element of risk with flooding. It's what constitutes a flood. Is it 10 milliwater running surface water running down the pavement, or is it a 2 feet flood coming through river? So there's interpretation in that. I noticed in the paper, Karen, you do talk about SEPA and the flood map, a degree of accuracy, but it's like that degree and that risk when you look at 0.5% chance of flood between now and 2080. So it has a major impact, as Dougie said, on the town centre, the development, Kilmarnock town centre. Planning's hard enough, it really is difficult enough taking everything into account now with cost implications, technology, and then weather change. But for me, I mean, looking at this, and it's no green belt, it has been developed, could still argue it is a developed site where you have the concrete foundation still there. There's wider implications, and it can be debated on that. I know the structure of the buildings are down about Glencairn, but the basis of the buildings, the foundations are still there. So there's lots of things for me. I think that SEPA does need to be challenged, and seriously. Need to be challenged on this, just based on the element of risk on this. And when you look at that map and the online maps, and you zoom in right across Kilmarnock Town Centre, and you look, even the only bit they've not got in where London Road meets Sturrock Street at that junction is the only bit that's not going to flood. I think it's ludicrous that we can go as high as that and as solid as that all the way right out down through to where the two rivers meet. On another point towards the end of the paper, and this is the ask that Kevin, I think, is made for that £60,000 to £80,000 on the flood defences. Given taking into consideration that we're not going to have any money spent on flood defences in East Ayrshire for the next, as it said in the paper, short to medium term, then I think that 10-year period, I think we could utilise that 60 to 80 somewhere else, perhaps round about active travel in the current time, then have a look at that spend again and that ask for that spend maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. But for me, it's a bit early, given all the implications round about this paper, to complete that plan now, because we know that's going to change. Come the end of that 10-year period, and SEPA might have introduced something else come the end of that 10 years. So for me, I'm a wee bit concerned about spending the 60 to 80 at this particular time.
Carl.
Through you, Chair. I understand the points that you're making. I think there's a few points on that and a few points why it's a good idea to do it now, despite the significant expenditure. One would be that by having the localised data, we may be able to support more planning applications and have that evidence to tell SEPA that actually the risk here is not as great as they expect, or that there are mitigation measures that we can put in place. But without that localised data, they will just look at the data that they've got and say that it's not acceptable because they can see the risk. So it helps us to present the evidence to SEPA where possible to support applications if the data tells us that that's something that we can do. The other point is around the evidence report that we have to prepare for Local Development Plan 3, and if we don't have additional evidence, it will make it harder for us to come up with a policy position whereby we can continue to try and push for the development of South Central Kilmarnock. And finally, I guess that part of the engagement we've had with the key agencies and SEPA around this is that they are wanting us to do this study so that they can help us look for ways that we can mitigate against risk, and without having that kind of additional localised knowledge, it would be harder for us to progress any work with the key agencies around South Central Kilmarnock. So there are ways maybe that we could do it slightly differently. For example, we could look at a phased approach to the study. We could just do a localised study of South Central Kilmarnock rather than looking at the entire local authority area. And that would obviously cost significantly less if we just did a sort of pilot study of that area. If that was, of lesser risk in terms financially.
Right. Thanks, Carl. I've got a number of folk I come in order. I've got number 1's John McFadden, then I've got Barry, Maury, and then Ian. John.
Hi, thanks, Dougie. I wonder if someone could just simplify this for me, if you know what I mean, because I've asked this question a few times. So if you use the Safeway site, for instance, down in Kilmarnock, which I'm pretty sure is suffers from the same problem. Would SEPA allow it to be built on if the developer, whoever built it, simply raised said building up on stilts or an exaggerated basement? I mean, it seems to me that we're saying that the thing totally blighted, we can't build on these things, and I keep hearing that said, and then I hear people saying about building up on stilts. So I mean, could Karen simplify? I mean, if, for instance, someone was originally going to build a 2-story blocks of flats on the Safeway site, but it's not worth it because if you had to build a big basement, then it wouldn't be cost effective. But if you built a 3 or a 4-story block of flats that was subsequently raised up, and the only thing on the ground would be the parking, which people park in there anyway all the time now, so that's established. Would you then be able to build on a site like that if you simply raised it? Is it simply a matter of raising it out of the water, or is it a lot more complicated? Thank you.
Thanks, John. I've got the feeling it's a lot more complicated, John, but I'll let Karen come in.
Through you, Chair, there are ways in some areas where you can mitigate risk through raising the floor levels or looking at what uses are in the ground floor level and having less vulnerable uses in the ground floor level. The issue we've got in South Central Kilmarnock is your access and egress, so your way in and your way out. So essentially, if the land which you want to develop is also surrounded by a floodplain and you don't have a safe way in and a safe way out, then it will then you've still got the issue, and SEPA will object to that. So yes, that particular site would be more complicated than that scenario. Yeah.
I mean, I think the good example of that is because that happened as the Aldi, and you don't have that now because the lines have changed across the flood. The boundary is extended to the west. There's that Titchfield Street and right up King Street, so you've got that issue there as well now. Who was next? Barry.
Thanks, Chair. I think we have often discussed, and generally we have agreed that the flooding implications as suggested by SEPA, blighting and creating a desert wasteland of South Central Kilmarnock and into the Irvine Valley just is completely unsustainable. The reality is most of these areas have been developed in the past. The key issue maybe would be in relation to bedrooms and where people are sleeping and the risk that comes from that. What I would say is I hear Karen and agreeing with her relative to the need to still do this study. Do we want to focus it on particular areas? South Central Kilmarnock and maybe parts of the Irvine Valley would make sense to me. But yet again, here we are being told vast swathes of brownfield land in our town centre is undevelopable. Sorry, and I just find that hard to swallow. I think we need to do all we can to have robust positions that we can challenge SEPA. I think officers need to absolutely be tough and talk tough when it comes to speaking to dealing with SEPA. And I would argue again, and I know you have done this in the past, but I think as a united front as council, we need to make it utterly clear how we feel, but we cannot leave vast swathes of our towns and villages as urban wastelands. It's not acceptable. The public will absolutely not support that. I will not support that. We understand climate change having an impact. Of course it is. And I get when people say, oh, this area has never flooded. With climate change, we know areas will flood in the future that maybe haven't in the past. It's about the correct uses. But to say nothing at all can happen here just isn't sustainable at all. I would not support that at all. And I would urge officers in particular to do all they can to have as robust evidence as they have, could possibly get the support of position. And we need to start getting tough. And you know what? Ultimately, if things are called in as a result of SEPA objections, so be it. We should not be having our development opportunities being strangled by potential flooding issues that without proper mitigation works that we're hoping to try and do in terms of the reports that we need. Thanks.
Thanks, but the microphone was a wee bit distorted, but we've got the broad elements of what you're saying, Barry, and I would agree. And I think, it would be our intention just to contact, as many SEPA and others that you suggest. And I think also has been suggested a senior planner at government level, just to kind of have a discussion with us, because we can't just sit back and just accept this, because not only that, I mean, there'll be other people in property there that are in these areas that will be a wee bit kind of concerned about, property values and all the rest that go with it. So we've really got to just tackle this robustly as we can. Karen.
Thanks to you, Chair. We certainly there are a lot of discussions going on across a lot of local authorities, and I obviously sit on Heads of Planning Scotland, and there have been a lot of discussions across local authorities about how problematic this policy is, and without kind of precluding Hobbs's position, I think it's likely that they will be issuing some correspondence to the Chief Planner at the Scottish Government. I know that also Kevin's had discussions at Scots around this, so it certainly is a kind of national issue, and there will be a lot of pressure going to the government in respect to this. And I think, yes, the Planning Minister and Chief Planning Officer, we can certainly write to them as well.
Thanks, Karen. Maureen?
Thanks very much. I have to say I was quite surprised by what Deputy Leader said about potentially, not spending this funding now as proposed within the paper, but actually looking at other schemes that we could do with in this time. Perhaps Kevin could confirm for me before I go any further that Cycle 3 funding, please. We've lost out on Cycle 2 funding, but Cycle 3 funding, I think, is quite a way off. Kevin, could you confirm for me when that would be available?
Through you, Chair. Cycle 3, there is no money at this moment in time. Cycle 1 has taken up the 42 million that's allocated annually for Scottish Government. Cycle 3 is going to be some years away, and we are estimating it around 2034, the way things are just now. Scottish Government are looking at a new funding model for flood protection schemes, but they haven't come up with anything at this moment in time.
Okay. So in the past, we've had criticism, and I think rightly criticism, that when funding became available, we weren't always ready to be able to snap to, not just in funding issues, but in other issues, to be able to go forward to apply for this funding. Given that we're hearing, and I would certainly support everything that's being said about how essential actually dealing with this issue that SEPA have presented for us is, I think we have to be doing our bit, and I would certainly support that we go forward, and not only that we actually make the spend now to actually sort of develop what would be the proposals, but that actually we make a commitment and an understanding on how important it is for us to keep doing this on an annual, not if it's not an annual basis, perhaps a 3-yearly basis, to update this, to make sure that the information that we have is as up to date and important as it possibly is, because I think, as Kevin is saying, 2034 before funding comes through. We've got considerable experience down in New Cumnock with how long it actually takes from funding being available to there actually being an effective flood prevention scheme up and running. And I think this is something that's absolutely essential that we move forward on. And we move forward on now, whilst, of course, doing all the lobbying that's being talked about in relation to SEPA. But we can't expect our people to go in and adequately lobby if what they do not have is the most up-to-date information as our information that we can possibly present. And I think that the recommendations here further strengthened that we make a commitment to ensure that we have a cyclical approach to ensuring that this is updated, whether it's 3, whether it's a 5-yearly basis. I think that's something that's essential.
Thanks, Maureen. I think there's a need, absolutely in terms of regular information. I think that we need to have that built in. I would agree with that. But I think we've also got to look at other schemes and other ways, and draw down an experience for other communities and how they've had to deal with this. And I think that's a bit of an exercise for us to do. Karen, do you want to comment just now before I'll bring a couple of other folk come in there?
Hey, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, in terms of updating the study, essentially the study outcomes will sit with the levels of risk that SEPA are prescribing. So if they're saying it's 1 to 200 plus 49% at the moment, we wouldn't need to update the study unless they change the level of risk associated with that. So say, for instance, in 5 years, they come back and said, well, now it's 1 to 200 plus 56. At that point, that would be when we would need to trigger doing a new study, but we wouldn't need to do anything between those 2 points.
You there, Ian?
Hi, Dougie. Thanks for that. Can I begin by saying I agree with everything that Barry said. I think we're absolutely right as a local authority to robustly challenge what appears to me to be a desktop exercise by SEPA. It really kind of sinks in when you realise they've prioritised 30 projects above us. We were an award-winning council back 20 odd years ago, and it almost feels like we're now being penalised for being a proactive council back then when we took the actions to meet the current or the then current requirements to protect the Kilmarnock Town Centre in South Kilmarnock. I just wonder if Karen could maybe enlighten us with what additional defences would we need to take us to this new risk threshold. Not really been made aware of that. I mean, we've obviously we're part of the way there already with what we've already got, so I thought we would need to add to that, Karen. I think it would be more advantageous if we could take the whole of the area out the flood risk rather than trying to deal with individual small developments as and when they come in front of us, because given the constraints of the size of these plots, it's going to be really, really difficult to do that. And also, Karen, if you're doing the survey, again, this is something that's troubled me since Scottish Water put the encased concrete sewage pipe down the riverbed behind King Street. How much additional risk did that create? Because there doesn't seem to be any mitigation for that. Quite clearly, it's taken away a large chunk of the riverbed without any payback somewhere else. It's obviously reduced the amount of water that can flow down that stretch of the river. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. I'll bring in Kevin first of all, but I think that's a fair point about the money. It was, what was it? 8 years ago, there was about £24 million invested, but it certainly it's cleaned up the beaches. But I don't think it's added anything to mitigate any flooding in the Kilmarnock area. Kevin.
Through you, Chair, it's to come in on the question around the schemes within the Irvine Valley. So, the study that we've got at this moment in time is one to 200 year event with only 25% climate change. That's the study that was carried out back in 2019. So the schemes that would be included, that are included in the River Irvine, are all the burns, including works around Darvel, New Milne, Galson and East Holme Reservoir, Kilmarnock Water, Simons Burn, Queen's Drive, and that also includes along at Crooked Holme. That's all included in the River Irvine study.
Thanks. Okay. John and Maureen went back in. John first.
Yes, thank you. I know I quite often look at things quite simplistically sometimes, but sometimes I think you need to just to get a direction where to go. So I fully agree with Barry and Ian. There's no way we can just write off huge swathes of our developable town centres. And when it comes to dealing with SEPA and all these desktop studies we're talking about and whatnot, when you they keep moving the goalposts, obviously, but they never seem to come up with quite exactly the same answer twice. So I seriously think we should try this, and I don't think it would be very expensive. So going on what Karen said to me about, the Safeway site, okay, it's not that simple because you have to deal with the way in and the way out. I think we should pick that site as an example. Pick any set of buildings we own plans for, so there's no money, and then put an application in principle, for instance, with said building smack bang in the middle of that Safeway site, and then, put forward a high level walkway out, one high level roadway out, whatever's required. Keep altering those plans just on paper until we can get SEPA to say, yes, this is acceptable, because I actually think we need to find a real world benchmark of what SEPA would see as acceptable, how far they'd push us before they'd agree we could build something. It's nothing to do with them, whether it's hypothetical and it's never getting built. And if we don't have to design it because we've already got plans and there's only minimal work our own in-house council, architects could do from the point of view of the ingress and egress way, I'd love to see what SEPA would turn around and say yes to, because then we'd actually have more than a desktop study. We'd have something we could say to any future developer or anyone interested in ourselves. Yes, we can get a positive answer from SEPA. This is actually what we've got to do. And then when we try other things, if you implement a very similar regime on a very similar site, SEPA can't turn around and go, oh, no, we don't like that this time, because you can then refer to them and go, well, you passed it that time. We almost need to find out where we are in the real world by doing something like that, I think. We're talking about millions or many millions in flood defences. We don't know yet exactly what they say yes to. I mean, Aldi pushed it and got their development done, but I know things have changed since then. But I think we need to create a benchmark. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I mean, I think I'm not want to stray into individual sites too much, but I know that Safeway site, the value of that site, certainly there was quite a significant amount of some exchange hands for a significant amount of money, maybe 15 years ago, and I don't think that money is there yet. So I think, if the developers there thought they could develop that site in any way, I think they would, but we maybe need a conversation with them just to see, what their intentions are for that site, and some of the people that own significant swathes of that ground, what would help them develop it. And I think we need to have that conversation. But over to Karen for some other points that were made.
Yeah, through you, Chair, thanks. What I would say is that SEPA's approach to all of this is very technical. It's very, black and white, essentially. They're not in a position where they'll do anything other than give you a technical response based on the data that they've got. And I think that's where the wider Scottish Government picture comes in when something's called in, around looking at NPF4 in the round and not just looking at one single policy. The site at Safeway is privately owned, and we have made contact with the owners to start to try and discuss with them what their aspirations for the site might be, and also in terms of what the constraints are around the site. And I think part of obviously what we're trying to do with the key agencies is specifically to look at South Central Kilmarnock, and we were kind of honing on in that site in particular to see what's possible there. There is, as I understand it, an extant consent on that site for retail units, but it's not at the moment what the developer, as I understand it, necessarily wants to do. So I think it is really about having those discussions with them around what their aspirations for the site are, seeing how close they are to what it is they already previously had consent for, and how we can move that work through forward to the key agencies group if at all possible.
Thanks, Karen. Maureen. Sorry, Maureen.
Yeah, thank you. We think again, and I appreciate the will, leader, from yourself to write to the key agencies. I think on this one, it is sufficiently important to us economically as an authority that we really need to go a bit further than writing to people. I think, you know, what I'm proposing is that we should actually be looking to have some kind of summit with representatives from the key agencies here, and we've done similar things in the past, but we actually physically need to drive them around the areas that they are effectively blighting by their decisions, and have them actually effectively look at that and look at what the join up of those areas are with other parts of our town within Kilmarnock, and actually look at that. So that's what I'm asking for as an addition in relation to this work.
Thanks, Maureen. I mean, as I said, I've already written to the Minister, you know, whether we make that ministerial visit, turn it into a summit and ask some of the other key agencies along with the Minister to discuss the issues, because they're in many cases existential for some of the businesses there. So I'll still get Ian to come in, Ian, before I go to recommendations. Ian?
Sorry, Dougie, it was just to see if Karen could maybe answer my two specific questions regarding what additional boosting of the existing defences we need, and also if she would agree that we could do a calculation as to the impact that the Scottish Water and their sewage pipe that was cased in about 5 foot square of concrete down the riverbed behind King Street has had on the flood risk for the town centre area, because quite clearly that's used up a sizable chunk of the riverbed, and I would like an explanation to that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. David, can you answer that?
I'll just come in on the Scottish Water issue. I mean, there was a full analysis carried out at that particular time, and obviously that would be linked into the flood prevention assessment. What I would say is that there is, and by the virtue of the Scottish Water pipe being located within the river and encased in concrete, it's actually reducing the amount of material that are liquid that would go into the river. Because if you cast your mind back, there was a lot of I think it was CSOs, combined sewer overflows, which came from the main sewers in places like King Street, and when the sewer did overtop, it then overtopped into the river. So that effectively, that mitigation work that was carried out by Scottish Water reduced that impact. So, and as Councillor Reid alluded to, it meant there was less impact further, downstream in terms of pollution. So that was what the CPAD forced Scottish Water in to do. So that there was, obviously there's a capacity issue there in putting that type of diameter of pipe and encasement into the river, but I think overall that's not what's really caused the kind of main issues, because the main issues are obviously the additional climate action and the fact that we've got, went from the 25% up to the 40+%. So that's where we've got a real issue. And in terms of the other question, Councillor, and I think Kevin had alluded to the fact that all the rivers and the issues leading into the various rivers have been looked at to see about, whether there's possibility of upstream detention. So in other words, you try to retain the water in fields, before it goes actually into the issues, and then the burns, and then the actual river. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Lynn.
Are you happy with that? Okay, and Maureen, you want back in?
Yes, please. I think, again, I mean, just picking up on what Ian said as well, the issue is it's what Kilmarnock Water, the River Irvine and Simons Burn. So we are talking about a considerable body of or bodies of water that we have to be aware of. And I do think that we really do need that visual. This is what this actually means, and this is how it physically relates to what commercial and industrial activity and our proposals for further residential developments are. So I really do think if we've got a ministerial visit set soon, I think it would be a good idea for us to invite other players and look at how we actually expand that.
Thanks, Maureen. I think that's helpful. My colleague, Councillor McMahon's got that up on the screen just now, and I was wondering if that could be shared at all. It is quite. When you see the scale of it for South Central Comata, it is quite significant. I don't know if we can. If members want to see it, if we wait a couple of minutes, we can show you the flood map, the latest flood map we've got for SEPA. Apologies, folks. We're not being technically we can't do that just now. But they're on. It's on the SEPA flood map, and I'd commend them to have a look at it. So I know, Jim, you wanted to add just a wee bit of clarification on the consultation study as well.
Yeah, again, Karen, this one's for units on that recommendation for the 60 to 80. That study and an extension to the contract, how long would that study last? Taking into account everything that's been put in front of us today and recognising that it's going to be at least 10 years and we're sitting about 30th on that list. So how long does a contract last? And if it is a short-term contract to update all the data we have, what would the implications be come the end of the 10 to 12 year? And maybe longer.
Can I ask just while you're thinking, just obviously we want as much information to inform this summit as we can. If we're bringing the minister down, and could that in any way be, could we, if we're going to spend that money, could we spend it relatively quickly to make sure that informs that whole process? Because that's where I think the value of the spending the money would be.
At the end of
it. Thanks, Chair. So we think the study itself will take probably around 6 to 8 months to complete. The study would remain valid until such point as SEPA changed the goalposts again, essentially, and we don't know when or what that might be. However, MPF4 will be in for a considerable amount of time, so we'll probably be looking at least 10 years before.
So how long do you expect then MPF4 to sit as it currently sits before there's a new?
Well, the master figures are 10 years, so there is a chance they might do tweaks it over that point, but I wouldn't imagine it would necessarily affect this policy.
So if the survey's done in 6 months, and potentially there could be changes again in 10 years down the road?
Yeah. I mean, there could be changes at any point, really, because the SEPA guidance sits behind NPF4, so although the policy itself wouldn't change, the guidance sitting behind NPF4 may or may not change.
So we could potentially need to go back again in 10 years' time to get further update on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is driven by the climate change predictions essentially, but it will also be driven by technology changes between now and then. There's not to say that there won't be methods of mitigation that are found that will actually help to alleviate this, within the same period.
Okay, so I'm going to move the recommendations as they are, but with it. Oh, sorry, Maureen and John.
I was just wondering if Karen could have sent me out just a copy of flood maps for all the areas in East Ayrshire. I mean, it'd be interesting to get a wee document showing all the areas and where the flooding. Would that be possible to get that sent out?
Jim's want to get I'll pass over to Jim just for a second.
If Karen wants to take it, the link in the paper to SEPA is really, really good, and that'll allow you to zoom right into Kilmarnock, right into King Street, right into the Palace Theatre. So the link on the paper is really good.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we could have got one, as a councillor, I could have just got a map of Stewart and Fenwick everywhere, just showing where the flood areas are, if that was possible. Thanks.
Okay, if I come in that through you, Chair, I'm just sorry, but no, I'm conscious that, you know, if we do that for every member, that's a lot of printing. So the flood map is dynamic. It's there. It's a map that we can certainly guide you how to use it and to make sure that you've got access to your particular wards. And we'll take that away as an action if you want, Councillor McFadden. But it's certainly more dynamic, I would say, than printing it off, because you can actually zoom into particular, you know, towns, villages, and see just the kind of the impact in certain pieces of land, if that helps. Thanks.
That would do, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, John. I really would commend the interactive map. It's really I can see there's potential in Cut Straw Road and places like that. John, you'd maybe want to have a wee look at for Stuart. Okay, can we now just maybe go to recommendation? I've already written to the Minister, but I would now like to formally invite the Minister down to meet as part of a summit with SEPA, Scottish Enterprise, you know, interested local businesses, community groups, to specifically look at flooding in Kilmarnock South Central, and continue to monitor the progress in other communities where there's issues of concern. Okay, can we agree that? Okay. I now move exclusion of press and public. Come to the final item, and that's, if that's agreed, move to stop recording now. If I ask, that makes sense, David. If you just give us a couple of minutes.
You're back on.
We're back on, right? Okay, over to you, David.
Thanks, Chair Members. Sorry about that. I hadn't picked up. We'd badged it that way. That's my fault. Just to remind members then, a paper was previously presented to Cabinet in October 2023 with regard to two matters, one related to the Council's funding relationship with a third-party organisation, and one related to a decision on the future or not of the Auchinleck Leisure Facility. Subsequent to the decision that was taken by Cabinet, the Council received intimation of a petition for judicial review, and that petition was based on, and I'm not going into legal advice, I'm just recording the facts, that petition was based on two grounds. One was the Council had failed to carry out equality impact assessment to inform the decision purportedly taken by Cabinet in October 23, and the other was on a lack of consultation. The first point, without going into detailed legal advice, quite simply was a matter of fact. An EQIA is legally required, and unfortunately one was not done prior to the meeting in October 23. So for the Council, that was a simple case of do not pass go. And on the second one, while there is no absolute legal obligation to consult in this context compared to, for instance, the statutory process around schools consultations, where there is a prescribed process thou must follow, the Cabinet in October 21, when it had previously considered this, had actually said itself that it would want some further targeted specific community engagement, which also unfortunately hadn't taken place in the intervening period, and therefore we were perhaps hoisted by our own petard. Suffice to say, Council and Cabinet have accepted the position and have accepted the legal advice previously provided that the Council now absolutely needs to step back from the decision taken in October, which we have done. The Council has launched a fresh consultation, and there is a report to come forward to Cabinet on the 7th of February following conclusion of that consultation, which will be presented to Cabinet, and Cabinet will be invited to take a decision in this matter once again and of new. In that connection, on Thursday, I received a very short email from one of the group of users that have come together to put forward their views and effectively to challenge the proposal to close the facility. And they have specifically asked, as of last Thursday, if a deputation, the specific request was for one of their number, but obviously it's for Cabinet to determine, to come forward and be allowed to speak on behalf of the user group at the Cabinet on the 7th of November as part of Cabinet's deliberation and prior to determination of the matter. In terms of the Council's standing orders, it's perfectly competent for anybody to make such a request for a deputation, and it falls to Cabinet to determine the deputation, not officers and not the chair in isolation, but to Cabinet.
And as we've done in the past with schools consultations, rather than leave that decision to the day of the Cabinet itself, i.e. 7th February, we brought this forward as an urgent and additional item so that Cabinet can determine the matter today, and whatever the decision may be today, it can be communicated, and depending on what it is, appropriate arrangements made in advance of the meeting on the 7th of November. And that's what we've done in the past with the schools. We've brought it to an earlier Cabinet to allow a decision to be taken and implemented before we get to the actual Cabinet. So that's the explanation for this being late. The request was only made on Thursday, and this is the last Cabinet before the one on the 7th of February. So that's why we're here. The ask is straightforward to be heard, and as I say, it's entirely up to Cabinet. For what it's worth, I would absolutely commend to Cabinet in the particular circumstances the request be exceeded. For two reasons. One, it's in the minds of the requester that the similar facility was afforded to that other third-party organisation before decisions were taken on their future funding at the same meeting last October. So I think it would be seen to be consistent. And two, given the particular history around this facility and the previous decision making, and some of the concerns still being expressed that the current consultation is no more than a tick box exercise, I think a positive decision to allow someone to come in and speak on behalf of the user group would hopefully go some way to allay those concerns, that whatever the outcome, as a listening council, you're happy to take a further opportunity so to listen. So that's the background, that's the ask, and that's the recommendation all in one to you, Chair and members, recognising it's absolutely for Cabinet to make this decision.
Thanks, David. Members quite happy to go with that recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks everybody, thanks David. Okay, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance. We have sounding board in 45 minutes ago. Half past sounding board, does that give you enough time?